There's a stage after 50 where financial missteps stop being minor. They may not appear dramatic, but they carry far more weight than before, simply because time feels different now. It's no longer something you assume is abundant. It's something you begin to track more closely. And because of that, each decision starts to matter more. Not only the major ones, but the small repeated choices that seem harmless in the moment. The ones you don't question because they feel familiar, because you've been making them for years without a second thought. That's where the real risk hides, not in obvious errors, but in unnoticed patterns. Habits that once felt safe, responsible, even intelligent, but no longer take you where you think they do. And because they don't feel wrong, they keep running quietly in the background. Most people expect financial trouble to come from big risks, bad bets, sudden losses, but after 50, it's often the reverse. It's the things that feel, because what feels safe isn't always what moves you ahead. There's a shift that happens at this point in life, a tendency to protect instead of grow, to hold instead of position, to avoid uncertainty, even if it means missing opportunity. And while that feels responsible, it can slowly limit your future. It doesn't happen overnight. It builds little by little, one decision at a time, 1 year at a time, until you look back and realize time has passed, but your position hasn't changed the way you expected. That realization can feel uncomfortable because you've been doing what you believed was right. You've been careful, you've been consistent, and yet something feels incomplete, like the progress doesn't match the effort you've invested. That's when awareness becomes essential, because the difference between staying stuck and moving forward isn't how hard you work. It's whether you can recognize the patterns that no longer serve you, and once you notice them, you can't ignore them. You begin to see where time is slipping away, where opportunities are being missed, where decisions are being made from habit will never reach that point. They continue doing what feels comfortable. They avoid looking too closely. They tell themselves things will sort out over time, and without realizing it, they repeat the same patterns year after year. That's where the cost builds. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, quietly, until the gap between where they are and where they want to be becomes harder to close. Because after 50, recovery takes longer. That's the part many don't want to admit. Mistakes don't just cost money, they cost time. And time, once spent, doesn't return, which means the margin for error becomes smaller. But here's what changes everything. Awareness gives you control. The moment you recognize what's been holding you back, you gain the ability to adjust, to choose differently, to move in a direction that actually supports where you want to go. And those adjustments don't need to be massive. They can be small, intentional shifts in how you think, how something meaningful. Because just like mistakes build slowly, so does progress. The key is knowing which patterns to break and which ones to strengthen. What you're about to hear isn't about fear. It's not about regret. It's about clarity, about seeing what most people overlook until it's too late and understanding what you can still do about it now. Because it's not too late to improve your position, but it is too late to ignore it. Every year that passes without change adds weight to the outcome. But every year used wisely can begin to turn things back in your favor. The difference lies in what you choose to see and what you choose to do next. So don't treat this as just information. Treat it as a moment to pause, to reflect, to recognize where you are and where you're heading if nothing changes. Because once you see it clearly, you have a choice to stay on the same path, or there comes a phase in a man's life when his thinking begins to shift so gradually that he barely notices it. It isn't triggered by failure, nor by any single event. It's shaped by time, experience, and repeated exposure to both success and disappointment. And within this shift lies one of the most dangerous financial mistakes a man can make. In earlier years, a man tends to lean toward growth. He looks for opportunity, he takes action, and he's willing to step into uncertainty in pursuit of better results. His thinking is focused on increase. He measures progress not by what he keeps, but by what he builds. Yet as time moves forward, there's a tendency for this mindset to reverse. He begins to focus more on what he has rather than what he could create. He becomes more cautious, more measured, and more protective. These traits seem wise, and in part they are, But when they become dominant, they start to restrict movement. This shift doesn't announce itself as limitation. It shows up as responsibility. A man tells himself he must be careful now, that unnecessary risk should be avoided, and that preserving what he has matters more than seeking more. These thoughts sound reasonable, and because of that, they're questioned. Yet beneath that reasoning lies a quiet risk. When protection becomes the main goal, growth slowly fades, not all at once, but over time. The man continues to act, continues to manage, continues to maintain, but the forward motion that once defined him begins to slow. There's an important distinction that must be understood. Protection maintains position. Growth improves it. When one fully replaces the other, the result isn't stability, it's stagnation. A man may remain in place, yet he is no longer sing. This condition strengthens through repetition. Each cautious decision reinforces the next. Each missed opportunity builds the belief that avoidance is the right path. Over time, the pattern becomes fixed. What started as a small adjustment turns into a way of thinking. Many men reach this point without realizing it. They believe they're acting wisely, and in some ways they are. They avoid unnecessary losses, fulfill responsibilities, and move forward without disruption. Yet when they stop to examine their position, they notice little has changed. Years may pass, and the outcome remains mostly the same. This isn't due to lack of effort, it's due to lack of expansion. There are many examples of individuals who have lived in this pattern for long periods. They earned steadily, saved consistently, and avoided what they saw as risk. Yet, despite their discipline, their position didn't improve as expected. They preserved, but they didn't grow. In contrast, there are those who, even later in life, maintained a focus on growth. They didn't abandon caution, but they didn't let it dominate their thinking. They continued placing themselves where growth was possible, using their experience with more precision. These individuals often appear different. They aren't reckless, yet they aren't restricted. They are intentional, yet not stagnant. Their actions suggest they understand something others don't, that protection alone isn't enough. Others begin to see them as composed, confident, and forward-moving. They're viewed not as people who are just maintaining, but as those still building. This perception creates opportunity because those who are seen as progressing are treated differently from those who are seen as holding. There is a statement that can help counter the drift toward excessive protection. I protect what I have, but I do not trade growth for comfort. This doesn't reject caution. It refines it. It reminds the individual that preservation and expansion must coexist. One without the other creates imbalance. As this idea settles in, the individual starts examining decisions more closely. He asks not only whether something is safe, but whether it moves him forward. He considers not only what he might lose, but what he could gain with the right direction. This process creates awareness. He begins to notice where his thinking has narrowed, where he avoided movement not because it was unwise, but because it felt unfamiliar, where comfort was chosen over positioning even when opportunity existed. There may be resistance in this realization. The mind prefers certainty, especially after years of experience. It suggests that maintaining the current state is enough, that seeking more adds unnecessary complexity. Yet these suggestions must be questioned because what seems sufficient today may not remain so tomorrow. The man who understands this doesn't abandon protection. He blends it with growth. He preserves what he has built while continuing to expand it. He doesn't retreat from opportunity. He approaches it with awareness. This approach changes his actions. He no longer avoids movement entirely. He chooses it carefully. He places himself where his experience can be applied, where his effort produces results, and where his time is used effectively. Over time, this balance starts to show. He is no longer static. He is moving forward, even if at a more measured pace. His actions are driven not by impulse, but by intention. He moves with clarity, not hesitation. Others begin to notice this shift. They see a man who hasn't withdrawn, but refined, who hasn't slowed, but focused, who isn't just protecting, but building with deeper understanding. This perception carries influence, because those who continue advancing when others stop are often respected. They're seen as people with insight, who understand how to move while others stay still. And through that perception, new opportunities appear. There's a deeper realization that emerges from this. What feels safe isn't always what moves you forward. Comfort, when unexamined, can become confinement, and protection, when not balanced with growth, quietly limits the future it's meant to secure. So the most dangerous part of this shift isn't that it looks harmful, but that it looks correct. It allows a man to continue without questioning, to act without disruption, and to remain without immediate consequence. Yet over time, the cost becomes clear, not through sudden loss, but through lack of gain. And so the first and most subtle mistake isn't reckless action, but excessive caution, not chasing opportunity, but quietly stepping away from it. The man who understands this doesn't reject safety, he redefines it. He realizes true security isn't found in standing still, but in continuing to move awareness, intention, and direction. And in that understanding, his future begins to open again. There's a natural tendency in every man to rely on what has worked before. This isn't weakness, it's efficiency. When something produces results, it gets repeated. When repeated often enough, it becomes habit. And habit, once formed, runs without conscious thought. In earlier years, this works in a man's favor. He develops methods to earn, manage, and maintain his position. Through repetition, these methods become dependable. They require less effort, less thought, and bring a sense of stability. For a while, they are effective. Yet what's often overlooked is that conditions change. Time shifts opportunity. Experience shifts perspective. Position shifts possibility. And what once created growth may eventually only sustain it. The habit remains, but its effectiveness fades. This is where the risk begins. The man doesn't immediately realize the pattern has lost value. He continues as before, trusting what has always worked. Familiarity creates confidence, even when results no longer support it. He saves the same way. He spends the same way. He directs resources based on patterns formed years ago. And because these actions feel right, they go unquestioned. Yet underneath this repetition lies a quiet truth. The environment where those habits were formed no longer exists the same way. What once required caution may now require positioning. What once created steady growth may now only maintain. What once was enough may now be limiting. Many people find themselves in this situation without realizing it. They did what they were taught. They were disciplined, consistent, responsible. Yet when they look closely, they see their position hasn't advanced as expected. Years pass and little changes. This isn't because they didn't act, but because they kept acting in a way that no longer produces progress. And there's a subtle difference between repeating what works and repeating what once worked. The first creates growth, the second creates stagnation. Consider the man who learned early to save part of his income. This habit served him well. It built discipline, reduced waste, and created a foundation. But if it remains unchanged, it may not take him further. He may continue saving, but without directing those savings toward growth, the outcome stays limited. The habit continues, but the result doesn't expand. Another man may have learned to avoid uncertainty completely. Early on, this protected him from unnecessary loss, but later it may prevent him from engaging with opportunities that require thoughtful action. In both cases, the habit isn't wrong, it's incomplete. And when left unchecked, incompleteness turns into limitation. There's a statement that can interrupt this pattern. I examine what I repeat and refine it toward better results. This introduces awareness into what was once automatic. It doesn't reject habit, it upgrades it. It reminds the individual that repetition must evolve to stay effective. As this awareness grows, he begins observing his patterns more closely. He notices where he acts without thinking, where he follows routine without question, where decisions come from familiarity rather than intention. This observation is the start of change. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, as habit gives certainty, and questioning it introduces doubt. He may hesitate, unsure whether to change what he has trusted for years. But he doesn't need to abandon everything. He needs to examine everything. He asks, does this still move me forward? Does it create growth or just continuation forward? Does it create growth or just continuation? Is it aligned with who I am now or who I used to be? These questions reshape his thinking. He no longer assumes the past will carry the future. He adapts, adjusts, and refines based on his current reality. Others who make this shift are often seen differently. They appear more aware, more engaged, more responsive. They don't cling to old methods out of comfort. They adjust with intention. This gives them an edge. While others repeat blindly, they refine consciously. They appear sharp, deliberate, forward-moving. The individual no longer depends only on past experience. He trusts his ability to evaluate and act in the present. This confidence isn't based on memory, but awareness. And awareness, applied consistently, creates control. Habits aren't the enemy, they're tools. But like any tool, they must fit the task. When the task changes, the tool must adapt. Otherwise, what once helped begins to hold you back. Many never make this shift. They continue out of familiarity, not effectiveness. They avoid the discomfort of change, the effort of rethinking, the uncertainty of a new path. And by doing so, they stay where they are. The cost isn't immediate, it's gradual. It shows up in years without progress, missed opportunities, unrealized potential. But the one who examines his patterns interrupts the cycle. He evolves his habits. He refines decisions. He aligns actions with present understanding instead of past assumptions. And through this, change begins. Not dramatic at first, but steady and intentional. He is no longer repeating just to maintain. He is repeating to grow. And that difference, though subtle, is powerful because it transforms habit from limitation into momentum. And in that shift, his financial path starts moving forward again. There's a belief that strengthens in many men over time. And although it appears wise, it often becomes one of the biggest barriers to progress. It's the belief that risk must always be avoided, that safety must come first, and that uncertainty should be minimized at all costs. This belief doesn't appear overnight. It's shaped by experience, loss, and the desire to protect what has been built. But taken too far, it creates a condition more dangerous than the risks it tries to avoid. In earlier years, a man may act with boldness. He steps into the unknown, tests possibilities, accepts uncertainty as part of growth. He sees opportunity where others see danger. But over time, it shifts. The memory of mistakes becomes stronger than the memory of progress. The desire to avoid loss outweighs the desire to create gain. And from that shift, a new pattern forms. It's not immediately harmful. It encourages caution, which has value. It prevents reckless decisions and protects against unnecessary loss. But when caution takes over completely, it limits movement. The man begins evaluating everything through avoidance. He doesn't ask what can be gained, only what might be lost. And in doing so, he restricts his own progress. There's an important truth here. Risk itself isn't the problem. Lack of understanding is. Action without thought leads to loss, but action with clarity creates opportunity. Avoiding all risk means avoiding all growth. It means staying where you are, not because it's familiar. Many reach a point where stillness feels like safety. They protect, maintain, and avoid anything uncertain. It feels responsible. It feels controlled. But over time, this stillness has a cost. It reduces opportunity, limits growth, and creates a slow decline that isn't obvious at first. This decline doesn't show up as loss, but as absence. No growth, no movement, no progress. The man continues, but doesn't advance. He preserves, but doesn't build. And because there's no immediate consequence, the pattern continues. There are many who live this way. They avoid risk, stay within comfort, protect what they have, but years later, they realize their position hasn't improved. Sometimes it has even weakened, not from action, but from inaction. Others, however, learn to see risk differently. They don't chase it blindly or avoid it entirely. They realize it. They understand what can be controlled and what can be direct. Act with intention. And through that, they place themselves where growth remains possible. These individuals are seen differently. Not reckless, composed. Not careless, but calculated. Their confidence comes from understanding, not ignorance. This builds trust, and trust creates opportunity. There's a simple principle that supports this mindset. I act with understanding, not fear. And I move where growth is possible. It doesn't remove caution, it balances it. That fear isn't guidance, it's a signal to think more clearly. As this mindset develops, the individual observes his behavior more closely. He notices where he avoided action, not because it was wrong, but because it was uncertain. He recognizes missed opportunities, not with regret, but with awareness. And from that awareness comes change. At first, it may be small. He starts asking questions instead of turning away. He looks for what can be learned and controlled. Uncertainty becomes something to understand, not fear. And gradually, perception shifts. What once looked like risk now looks like possibility. Not guaranteed, but available. Movement requires uncertainty. Without it, growth stops. Others notice this change. They see someone engaged again. Thoughtful, but active. Careful, but not frozen. This balance stands out. It's rare and valuable. This shift doesn't require reckless action. It requires thoughtful movement, consideration, evaluation, intention, but not fear-driven avoidance. There will be moments when old habits return, the pull towards safety, towards staying the same. In those moments, awareness matters because repeated avoidance doesn't create safety, it creates limitation. With consistency, the new pattern strengthens. The individual becomes more confident in handling uncertainty, more capable of making decisions, more willing to act when direction is clear. This doesn't increase risk, it increases opportunity. His world expands, sees more, engages more, moves beyond previous limits. Others respond to this. They see someone still growing, still building, still moving forward. And perception attracts new opportunities. In the end, risk isn't eliminated, it's understood, directed, used. The real danger isn't moving forward, it's standing still when movement is needed. And once that's understood, progress begins again. There's another belief many carry without realizing it. That time itself will fix things, that if they keep going, stay consistent, avoid mistakes, life will eventually improve. It's comforting, it removes urgency. In earlier years, it seems true. Work leads to growth, experience increases income, time appears to reward effort. But what's often missed is that conditions change. Time doesn't create progress, it amplifies direction. If you're moving correctly, it helps. If not, it locks you into the same place. That's the real risk. A man may continue for years thinking things will improve while nothing actually changes. No loss, so he assumes progress. Until one day he looks back and realizes movement never happened. That real is quiet, but powerful. Some ignore it, they say more time is needed, and by doing so, repeat the same pattern. But time doesn't fix direction. It reveals it. Without change, time deepens your current path. It doesn't move you forward. It carries you further along the same road. And if that road isn't leading where you want, the longer you stay on it, the harder it becomes to turn. There are those who understand this. They don't rely on time, they direct it. They use each year intentionally. They don't wait for change, they create. And that's why their progress is visible. They aren't rushed, but they're never idle. Their actions are focused. Their decisions deliberate. They don't get carried by time, they keep it. And that difference shows. There's a simple idea that supports this. Time works for me only when I use it with purpose. And with that awareness, everything begins to shift. What you have just listened to was only the first half of this lecture. Access the full lecture through the first link in the description. By the way, hey, I'm John, the founder of this channel. I started this channel and wanted to stay in the background and keep the main focus on the message of this channel. But as our community continued to grow, I decided to take the responsibility and step up and build a community around these teachings. So, hey, nice to meet you. I'm Jan, and don't forget to access the full tape through the first link in the description.